तैजसानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर् बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तेजसानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर् बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तेजसानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर् बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तेजसानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर् बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तैजस्यानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानाविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर्बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तेजस्यानीन्द्रियाण्येव क्रियाज्ञानाविभागशः प्राणस्य हि क्रियाशक्तिर्बुद्धिर्विज्ञानशक्तिता तेजसानि produced from egoism in the mode of passion. Indriyani, the senses. Eva, certainly. Kriya, action. Jnana, knowledge. Vibhagasha, according to. Pranasya, the vital energy. Indeed. Kriya Shakti, the senses of action. Buddhi, of the intelligence. Vijnana Shaktita, the senses for acquiring knowledge.
So, the translation reads, egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses. The senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses of action. The senses of action depend on the vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. So, here is, well, actually, she's responsible here. Egoism in the mode of passion.
Egoism in the mode of passion
Produces two kinds of senses. Senses for acquiring knowledge.
The senses for acquiring knowledge.
And the senses of action.
And the senses of action.
The senses of action.
The senses of action
depend on the vital energy. And the senses for acquiring knowledge.
Depend on intelligence.
It has been explained in the previous verses that the mind is a product of ego and goodness, and that the function of the mind is acceptance and rejection according to desire. But here, intelligence is said to be a product of ego and passion. That is a distinction between mind and intelligence. Mind is a product of egoism and goodness, and intelligence is a product of egoism and passion. The desire to accept something and reject something is a very important factor of the mind. Since the mind is a product of the modes of goodness, if it is fixed upon the Lord of the mind, aniruddha, then the mind can be changed to Krishna consciousness. It is stated by Narottam Das Thakur that we always have desires. Desires cannot be stopped. But if we transfer our desires to please the Supreme Personality of God, that is the perfection of life. As soon as the desire is transformed to lording it over material nature, it becomes contaminated by that. Desire has to be pure. In the beginning, this purification process has to be carried out by the order of the spiritual master. Since the spiritual master knows how the disciples' desires can be transformed into Krishna consciousness. As far as intelligence is concerned, it is clearly stated here that it is a product of egoism and passion. But by practice, one comes to the point of the mode of goodness. And by surrendering or fixing the mind on the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one becomes a very great personality or Mahatma. In Bhagavad Gita, it is clearly said, Sa Mahatma Sudurlabha, such a great soul, is very, very We can actually see, therefore, that those who are very passionate can improve in material acquisition very quickly. It is recommended in the Vedic scriptures that if one wants to encourage a person in acquiring material possessions, one should also encourage him in sex life. We naturally find that those who are addicted to sex life are also materially advanced because sex life or passionate life is the impetus for the material advancement of civilization. For those who want to make spiritual advancement, there is almost no existence of the mode of passion. Only the mode of goodness is prominent. We find that those who engage in Krishna consciousness are materially poor. But though the one who has eyes can see who is greater, although he appears to be materially poor, a person in Krishna consciousness is not actually a poor man, but the person who has no taste for Krishna consciousness and appears to be very happy with material possessions is actually poor. Persons actuated by material consciousness are very intelligent in discovering things from material comforts, but they have no access to understanding the spirit soul or spiritual life. Therefore, if anyone wants to advance in the spiritual life, he has to come back to the platform of purified desire. The purified desire for devotional service, as stated in Bhāgavatam, engagement in the service of the Lord with the senses of purified Krishna consciousness is called pure devotion. Egoism in the mode of passion produces two kinds of senses: the senses for acquiring knowledge and the senses for action. The senses of action depend on vital energy, and the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on intelligence. So this verse is further on into this unfolding process of material creation. Material creation, at least at this stage, there are no visible manifestations yet. These are all very subtle and, we could say, global features or items being produced. We don't get into actually seeing things until Brahma takes over, things that we would actually be able to perceive with our senses. You know, what does the mode of passion look like? What does false ego look like? They don't have a virtual aspect, as far as I'm aware. And the senses here, we're talking about the five knowledge acquiring senses, Jnana or Jnana Shakti, as they're described here. Yeah. And the working senses are called here. There's a Jnana Shakti and the Kriya Shakti. So Kriya is to work. Usually they're called Jnanindriya and Karmindriya. We have a different term here for both of them. These are not being created for any particular reason. It's just like the blueprints are being created. If you were going to set up an automobile manufacturing process, an automobile factory, like and you were that determined to do that and wanted to move to Detroit, then you could set up, first of all, where are you going to get the raw materials? And you have to set up where you're going to draw on your pool for employees. Then you would draw blueprints. And sourced all your raw materials and parts that you're not manufacturing yourself. The assembly line is there, employees have been hired, then cars start rolling off the assembly line. So that'll happen when Vermont takes over, that's the other part. So sometimes this is called the Prakriti Saga, which is a section of creation which deals with how the elemental and subtle things come together to set up creation. And then the part where Brahma takes over is the Vaikuntha Saga, where Brahma starts to create planetary systems, and eventually he gets into this frustrating situation of trying to populate the universe, which is very frustrating for him. But then we actually have cars rolling off the assembly line. So, what's interesting here is that we have a gradual unfolding process. And it starts in this book written by Shrimad or Stephen Knapp, called How the Universe Was Created and Our Purpose in It. He describes that there are 9 creations. And he also mentions that they don't always happen exactly in the same order. There can be some variation, just as if you were going to set up an automobile manufacturing plant. Maybe you would get the funding first, and then you would do some other thing. Maybe you would scope out where you were going to build the factory first, or whatever it is. So these are not exactly always in the same order. And he describes that the first thing we can say is the Maharaj, and there's what we read about in the very early part of this chapter, that there is the agitation of the pradhan, and it develops into the Mahata. That's the Maharaj. Then we heard about something that I'm going to call the Ahankara Sarga, and that is where false ego is generated. We learned about false ego being Sankara or Ananta. So this false ego is the first thing generated. And then you see from that we have a further sublimation into the 3 modes of nature, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas. So these are generated from the agitated Mahata that has produced the false ego. And now that it's produced the false ego, now these 3 modes of nature are interacting individually with the original false ego, or the original Mahata. So, Bhuta Sarga is the formation of the 4 gross elements: earth, water, fire, air, and actually 5 gross elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether, and the 5 subtle sense objects: touch, taste, form, smell, and sound. Oh, these are generated in Bhuta Sarga, and we find that the basic sort of stuff is generated there. Of course, again, we don't have any forms yet, we just have the basic stuff. Then, after that, we have what we're hearing about here, which is the creation of the 5 gross senses and the 5 knowledge-acquiring senses and the 5 working senses, which is sometimes called the Taijasa Sarga or Indriya Sarga. So the senses are being created. And along with them, we have the intelligence being created. And then we have what gets called then the
Vaikarika Seva, which is the Sarga, Vaikarika Sarga, which is the creation of the 10 demigods which control the senses. Again, the demigods are not being created as far as I can tell. What's actually happening is their positions or blueprints are being created. And along with that, we get the was the mind created? Where did it say the mind was created? And with in the mode of ignorance creation, or what's that? Yeah, okay. Mind was created in goodness. Okay, so mind was created in goodness. All right. So in this particular succession, we have it kind of a little bit different. We have the creation of uh, the gross elements, and we have the creation of the mind. Then we have, I mean, the creation of the mode of goodness off products. Then we have the creation of the mode of passion off products, but more or less the same thing. So another way to think about this is if you were going to bake a cake or bake bread, let's say. So you could get all the things necessary for that. You would have the flour, you would have the water, you would have the oil, the sugar, and the yeast or whatever it is. And you would mix them all together. But you haven't got any bread yet. You know, you have to wait for them all to be mixed together for the dough to rise and then finally put it in the oven. So in the same way, we're kind of at the stage where we're collecting the ingredients, the flour, the oil, the sugar, et cetera, et cetera. But we haven't baked anything yet. So that's kind of what's happening at this stage. What's also we can take note of is that in this particular sarga, which is actually the Aindriya sarga, or sometimes the Taijasa sarga, that in this particular creation, we have mention of pran, or the life force being generated. So pran is the life airs. They're very subtle, and they are essential to regulating the way that the mind or the self interacts with the body. So if one can control the life airs, one can be a yogi. And that's actually what yoga is all about. We are performing various bodily postures so that we can drill the life airs. And when we work with the life airs in a certain way, then we change our relationship to this gross body. And that's what yoga is all about. Of course, it's a very arduous and difficult process, but that's basically what it's based on. So the life airs are coursing throughout the body in various ways. And when we have some life airs that we're very much aware of, like the fact that we breathe, that's one type of life air, but there are numerous other life airs. There's some basic important ones, and then there's myriads of less important ones. So each one of them does some function in relating the body to the self. So this is described here. And we find that, what does it say here, that the senses for acquiring knowledge depend on the intelligence, but the senses for action depend on the prana. So our knowledge acquiring and our active senses, they are like windows or doors through which we experience the outside world. We are situated in a huge machine. I call it the big machine. And we're actually living in the little machine, which is our body. So The little machine walks around in the big machine. The little machine is the body. And we hear about this in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 13, Nature, Enjoyer, and Consciousness. We hear more details about Kshetra, Kshetragya, Prakriti, Purusha, etc. So these are aspects of the way that we perceive reality. And Sankhya is the third step in an overall understanding of the world around us, which was a traditional approach to understanding the world in Vedic times. So you first had what we call Nyaya, or logic. And Nyaya was how to think and reason properly, which in our modern philosophical systems would be equivalent to what's known as epistemology, which epistemology is one of those big words, but what it means is, what is knowledge? When we talk about knowledge, or we talk about somebody having it, what do we mean? And that is epistemology. What knowledge is, where we get it, how much of it can we actually have, or does it exist at all? So that's epistemology. And so, in one sense, in modern philosophy, that's become the most important and only really talked about thing. Everything else got shoved to the side. But this is where Vedic investigation starts with Nyaya. Then there's Vaisheshika, which is the process where we understand that everything is made of tiny particles, and they're called atoms. Now, of course, modern science also thinks this way. However, what the Vedas call atoms and what modern science calls atoms are not the same thing. They're related, but they're not the same thing. So first we learn about how to think properly, then we learn how everything in the material world boils down to little particles. Then the third step is Sankhya, where we learn how the living entity experiences reality, and it subsums, and pulls together what we learned in Nyaya and what we learned in Vaisheshika. And of course, it goes on from there. But we know from history that these five schools, which were, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, then we had yoga, or the Patanjali system. Then we had Karma Mimamsa, and finally we had Vedanta Darshan. There's 6 schools altogether. They were part of one cohesive whole that took a person from material consciousness, absolute ignorance, to the stage where they understood there was a supreme person, and that to serve the supreme person was really the goal of everything, which you would get at Vedanta Darshan, the last of the 6. However, as time would have it, the succession was broken and the knowledge appears to be lost. In other words, the 6 schools became competitors rather than steps in the same process. And each one gradually developed its own champions and professors, people who were expert in Nyaya, people who were expert in Vaisheshika, people who were expert in Sankhya. And in this case, that Sankhya deviated from Kapila Dev's version to another Kapila's version. And we had yoga. And each of these was, in effect, saying, we are the real process. Everything else is just not of any real value. So we should do only yoga. We don't have to care about any of this other stuff. Or we should just be doing Nyaya, or logic. That was a big one. And this went on for many centuries. And finally we got to the stage where Karma Mimamsa basically won out over everything else. So Karma Mimamsa was at sort of the next to the last stage. Karma Mimamsa tries to understand how karma fits into this whole picture. So we learn about logic, then we learn about atoms, then we learn about how reality works with the 24, 26 elements of Sankhya. Then we learn about meditational yoga. Then we learn about karma, which is karma mimamsa philosophy. Of course, these, as they got progressively into the modern day, as they became more and more modernized, they all became godless as well. So each one of these 5 schools does not really mention the Supreme Lord. And the Karma Mimamsa philosophers, they began to promote sacrifices, and these sacrifices were intended for, pleasing the Supreme or the demigods. But really, their real purpose was to slaughter animals so that people could eat them. And these became more and more prominent, and it became more of a widespread thing. And this is why the Supreme Lord sent Lord Buddha. And Lord Buddha came, put a stop to these vicious, wholesale, large-scale animal sacrifices, which he did. But Buddha preached an atheistic philosophy. So this is how the West was, or the East was lost at this point. So the other philosophies were there, and then Buddhism began to eclipse even Karma Mimamsa philosophy. And of course, Emperor Ashoka made Buddhism the state religion when he converted himself to Buddhism. And so India then became largely a Buddhist country, at least officially. At least the state version of religion was Buddhism. Then, of course, Sankaracharya would come later and remove Buddhism, at least from India, but it remained in the rest of the Orient. But this is how history works, that this 6 stages of knowledge became 6 competing schools. Then the one that was winning out was Karma Mimamsa, and that created these widespread wholesale animal sacrifices. And then Krishna asked Buddha to come, and Buddha gave his main principle, which was ahimsa, or nonviolence, and he brought to an end, at least to some extent. We see that still in the world these things happen. It isn't that Buddha stamped it out. Ironic thing is that modern Buddhists, most of them are not vegetarian, except the ones in Taiwan, at least that I'm aware of, So, any rate, to move on, we find that the intelligence and the mind are being talked about. And usually we hear, as we heard yesterday from Param Brahma, that there's this chariot of the body, and it has 5 horses, and the horses have reins, and the reins are going to the driver, and the driver is sitting with the passenger in the chariot of the body. So that's usually the way it's described. And this is one of the metaphors to understand how the mind relates to the intelligence. So the mind is the driver. In other words, it's pulling the reins on the horses. The intelligence is the driver. He's pulling the mind, which is the reins, and the horses are the senses. So the senses are going some direction. They're attracted by some item. And the intelligence, as we're hearing today's verse here, the intelligence is supposed to evaluate what the senses are being drawn towards and decide whether that's good, bad, or indifferent. And this is the nature of what the intelligence is supposed to do. The intelligence will understand what to do if it's been trained up in Shastra. If the intelligence has not been trained up in Shastra, the intelligence will simply decide what is the best going option for sense gratification right now. So the living entity will be pulled sometimes by, whether I want to eat or go to sleep, or whether I want to watch something on a video. So the material, mundane intelligence will decide, well, I think I will enjoy most by eating. So decide to do that. Or will think very cleverly and think, I can eat and watch video at the same time. So then we go and get the food and we watch the video too. So this is the nature. However, if the intelligence has been situated in Vedic knowledge, then he will think, well, do I really need to do either of those things right now? I should do something else. And so the intelligence will deliver the verdict to the mind, and the mind is the accepting and rejecting aspect, and the mind will pull the senses away from what they had intended to do toward what they should be doing. And of course, this is the way it should all work. And therefore, if someone can control the mind, as we hear in 6th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, the super soul is already reached. So this is why we hear about purifying desires, and sometimes we hear it used with the metaphor of controlling the mind. So if we control the mind, we can direct the horses. And this is where we get that mysterious name, that compound word that we call Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada coined that word, and you stop and think about it, it's a strange name. You know, you would create an organization and you would call it Krishna consciousness. So essentially, that very name is to alert us to the fact that if we can just be conscious of Krishna, essentially that's all we have to do. That is in essence what our entire movement, our entire philosophy is about, is to always be conscious of Krishna, to think about how can I serve Krishna, to think about Krishna's name, form, qualities, and pastimes, to think about the devotees of Krishna, how to best serve Krishna, how to give Krishna information to other people. This is Krishna consciousness. So in this way, we can recognize that the process of Krishna consciousness is to focus the mind on Krishna. And this is the same as we've been hearing. We heard that there are three modes: sattva, rajas, and tamas, goodness, passion, ignorance. But sattva in the material world is never found without some tinges of rajas and tamas. So therefore it's not Shuddha sattva. Shuddha sattva is goodness with no tinges of passion or ignorance. And that exists in the spiritual world. So Shuddha sattva. And we heard earlier about the Vasudeva consciousness, which is actually Suddha sattva, or purified goodness, goodness with no tinges of passion and ignorance. So if we can progressively focus more and more often on Krishna, then we are accomplishing Krishna consciousness, and we will come to the Vasudeva platform, as it's sometimes called. And then we're hearing about how these various things, Vasudeva, Aniruddha is the expansion into the mind, I think, right? And Pradyumna is expansion into the intelligence, if I remember right. So these four aides de camp, as Prabhupada calls them, from Krishna we get Balaram, from Balaram we get this first Chaturvyuha. I'm not sure whether these are expanded from the first Chaturvyuha or from the second Chaturvyuha, but at any rate, we have Vasudeva, which is pure consciousness. And that gets expanded into, for the individual, the chitta. Then we have the, Aniruddha, which expands into the mind, and Pradyumna, which expands into the intelligence. And then we have Sankarshan, which becomes the false ego. So these are expanded aspects, and then they're mixed together, and they become the world that we live in. And our duty in the world is try to more and more drag our consciousness back to Krishna. If we can do that, we have accomplished Krishna consciousness. So, Krishna Surya Sama Maya Haya Andakar Yahan Krishna Tahinaha Mayara Adikar. That Krishna is like the sun, Maya is like darkness. Wherever there is Krishna, there cannot be darkness. So it's actually quite a simple concept. Execution is another story, but the concept is simple. But what we are doing, and Prabhupada mentions it, is we're following a system to gradually train our minds and train our intelligence, what it should be doing, and train the mind to act in a way where it moves the senses towards the right purposes, doesn't block the senses like Mayavad philosophy would have, but it uses the senses in service of Krishna. And then as we do that more and more, we are becoming Krishna conscious. And we will experience the purification and the happiness that come with Vasudeva consciousness. Okay, so I'll ask if there are any questions or comments from our, do we have, okay, is it on? I was really disturbed the last 2 or 3 days that all the questions were not mic'd at all, and I couldn't hear a single, we'd hear Param Brahma say yes, and then we'd hear beep, 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 beep.
Okay.
And then he would go, oh, yes, 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 or, Veda Vyaspriya, same thing, and people would be asking a question, you couldn't hear the question, and, the speaker didn't repeat the question, so there was no way to get that part of the class. Yes, okay, great.
Hi, Krishna. Thank you for the class. It's very nice. I have a couple questions if there's enough time. But the first one, I'm a little bit confused. It says that mind is a product of egoism and goodness, and intelligence is a product of
Which one are you
egoism and
reading?
passion. What?
Which one are you reading?
Just the purport from this
Okay.
verse. So I'm a little bit confused because it seems that intelligence would be higher than the mind.
Yes.
So why is it that intelligence is produced from passion rather than goodness? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, these are the same issues I've pondered about for a long time myself too. That some things seem to be kind of not the way you would suspect they would be, and I've never heard any explanation of why they are one way or the other. I'm afraid I can't throw any more light on that. But it is interesting that Sankarshan or Anant becomes the false ego. He expands. Of course, it just shows that the Supreme Lord uses his various subsequent avatars or expansions to create elements of the material, soup. So he uses it to create that. Now, exactly why and why something comes from one place and not the other, I don't know.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. The other one, you mentioned that so wherever there is Krishna, there is no darkness. Wherever there is light, there is no darkness. But we find often that wherever Krishna is, the demons are there also trying to... And we see devotees are often, though devotees are practicing Krishna consciousness, we're often tested or, things come like this. So can you explain how that is possible?
What, the devotees do what now exactly?
Or like devotees that are practicing Krishna consciousness, oftentimes like something will try to come and cover the Krishna consciousness, I think. Maybe I'm wrong, but...
Cover Krishna consciousness.
I guess...
Are you saying sometimes devotees appear not to be in pure Krishna consciousness? I wonder where that might be.
This is that's part of my next question. But, okay, so I guess why does it say that where there is light, there can be no darkness, when we know that where Krishna is, a lot of times demons are coming there as well? Can you explain that at least?
Yeah. I think the question that you're asking is we know that when you are thinking about Krishna, you are, as we hear in 14th chapter, I think, of Bhagavad Gita, one rises to the level of Brahman immediately when one is engaged in Krishna consciousness, unfailing in all circumstances. One overcomes the modes of nature and comes to the level of Brahman, I believe is how the verse goes. But that's also the answer, that we certainly do think about Krishna, but the next moment we forget about Krishna. And we don't think about Krishna completely. We are still sometimes thinking of Krishna as the tool by which we can get our material desires fulfilled. So because of those, as we hear, it's Krishna consciousness has to be unmotivated and uninterrupted in order to completely satisfy the self. Ahoitiki apratiyata. So to be purely in Krishna consciousness, one has to be both unmotivated and uninterrupted. And that's, as Shakespeare would say, wherein lies the rub, is to keep ourselves constantly and in an unmotivated way. So when we were discussing yesterday, yeya tamam prapajante tam sataivi bhajamyaham mama vartmanu and manusya partha sarvasha, that as they surrender to me, so if you surrender 15%, you get 15% Krishna consciousness. If you surrender 20%, you get 20%. If you surrender 80%, you get 80% reciprocation from Krishna. And so devotees are in some gray area there. They're sometimes surrendered, sometimes not, sometimes motivated, sometimes purely. But the process of Krishna consciousness is so nice that if we just stay with the process, the better part of Krishna consciousness will win out and push the worst part of Krishna consciousness out. So the better part will win, and the not so wholesome aspects of our processing Krishna consciousness will be shoved to the rear and eventually eliminated. Is that your question, or did I miss the whole point of what you were asking?
Yeah, that kind of answers a little bit my second question, like, which was kind of how, when we do experience these moments of motivation, and then we experience times of non-motivation, especially in the city, it feels things are going up and down a lot. So I'm just curious how to maintain kind of like a consistent state of being motivated and trying to, stay consistent. But I was really concerned about this because we hear this saying a lot that says, where there is light, there is no darkness.
Mm-hmm.
But then we do often find that, like, Krishna is there and then all the demons are there, and so it feels like there is both, light is there and then demons come as well.
Again, if we're talking about a group effect, then not everyone is purely motivated. So that has the effect of co-opting a group effort for Krishna consciousness. So some may be purely motivated and some may not be so purely motivated. And again, Krishna will sort things out. And sometimes the leaders have to sort things out and, separate things out from people who are doing things ostensibly under the banner of Krishna consciousness, but are in reality some form of material aggrandizement. And that happens all the time, I'm afraid, So sometimes the solution is to make some adjustment to the people who are doing what they shouldn't be doing. And sometimes they have to be removed. And sometimes it's just a matter of, preaching, and a person will realize, oh yes, I'm being moved in the wrong direction, so I should change my attitude. Krishna consciousness can be like that, and we should not expect that we are going to see perfect examples of Krishna consciousness, and but we should see that if a person is genuinely Krishna conscious, that they will be moving in a positive direction. And just as we tolerate the things that others have not yet transcended or managed to work out in their own lives, they have to tolerate what we have not yet surrendered to or worked out in our lives. And, there are limits. When something gets below a certain standard, then you have to do something about it. But at any rate, that's kind of generally how I would respond. And again, I'm not sure whether that was your question or I'm missing the point.
No, yeah, I understand what you're saying now. Thank you, it does answer. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so we are at about 2 or 3 minutes over. So thank you all very much for your kind attention. All glories to Shrimad Bhāgavatam, all glories to the Vaishnava devotees of the Lord. Hare Krishna.